"Auntie from the city, teach us your ways," they pleaded. "How do you walk with such boldness? How do you carry yourself like the world belongs to you?" They were so desperate that they were willing to trade their meager savings just to learn. In the vast village of Umuofia, where news traveled faster than the Harmattan wind, there lived an old woman named Mama Makoko. Though age had etched deep lines into her face, she carried herself with elegance, her presence commanding respect. But for all her wisdom and grace, there was one thing she longed for above all else: her granddaughter Nkem. Nkem lived in the city, far from the dusty paths of Umuofia. She was a young woman of stunning beauty, the proud owner of a thriving beauty salon. But despite her success, she had not visited her grandmother in years. Mama Makoko, knowing the ways of the young, played her cards wisely. "Nkem, my daughter, why have you refused to come see me? You know you are my only granddaughter, the only family I have left. Come now, before I close my eyes forever." The words stirred something deep in Nkem. She had been so caught up in city life, in the rush of business and beauty, that she had almost forgotten the warmth of her grandmother's hut, the scent of the earth after rainfall, the distant hum of talking drums at night. This time, she would go. She would see Mama Makoko before it was too late. The journey to Umuofia was long, the roads winding and uneven. When the bus finally pulled into the village square, a fine red dust settled on its tires. The moment Nkem stepped out, the village seemed to pause. Women whispered behind cupped hands, their eyes wide with admiration. Men stood still, unable to look away, the effortless sway of her hips. But above all, it was the striking red heels she wore. The young girls of the village gathered along the roadside, staring in awe, saying, "Look at her KONKO shoes." The sound was so distinct that villagers peered from their huts, wondering what could be making such a noise. Even the children, whom she had never met, ran up to her, offering to carry her bags, their small hands reaching eagerly. Mama Makoko, upon seeing her granddaughter, rushed forward with a speed that belied her years. "Mama, I thought you said you were dying. So it is only when I am dying that you will remember you have a grandmother, eh?" They both laughed as they embraced, the years of distance melting away. Inside the large hut, the smell of roasting goat meat filled the air. Mama Makoko had spared no expense. Fresh palm wine was poured, steaming dishes were laid out, and word quickly spread that the old woman's granddaughter had returned. By nightfall, the hut was brimming with young men, all eager to catch a glimpse of the city girl. The sound of drums and singing filled the air. Nkem, her heart light with wine and joy, stepped out into the open courtyard. She lifted her skirts slightly and began to dance. The villagers watched, spellbound. She had always been admired in the city, but nothing compared to this moment. Among the many young men who had come to see the enchanting city girl, one watched from the shadows. Kofi. A successful farmer, Kofi provided most of the village's food, and every unmarried woman dreamed of becoming his wife. Yet he had never shown much interest in any of them. Tonight, however, his sharp eyes followed Nkem's every move. The way her hips swayed to the rhythm, the sparkle in her eyes as she twirled, the sound of her laughter mingling with the night breeze, it was intoxicating. But as the drums slowed and the night deepened, Mama Makoko knew it was time to dismiss the crowd. Under a sky full of stars, Nkem and her grandmother sat together, sipping palm wine. "My daughter, do you know what is the hardest thing to find in life? Money?" Mama Makoko shook her head. "Gold?" Another shake. "Diamonds?" "Love. Love is the hardest thing to find." She had never given love much thought. Her salon in the city took all her time. "This night will decide your fate, my child." "Mama, what are you talking about?" But the old woman only took another sip of palm wine, staring into the distance as if she could see something Nkem could not. By morning, the whole village was buzzing with news of Nkem's arrival. The whispers had traveled far, even reaching the ears of King Ikenga, the most powerful man in the land. King Ikenga had 5 wives, each chosen from noble families, but none had captured his interest quite like this city girl had. A woman with beauty, grace, and a presence that left men speechless. He had to see her for himself. And so he sent his royal guards to summon Nkem to the palace. Her KONKO shoes clicked against the ground in sharp, rhythmic beats. The sound was so distinct that villagers peered from their huts, wondering what could be making such a noise. When she entered the palace, she immediately knelt before the king, as custom demanded. She is not only beautiful, but respectful, he said, glancing at his other wives who sat at the corner with tight expressions. You see, women from the city can be wife material. The king ordered a lavish feast in her honor. Exotic meats, the finest palm wine, music from the best drummers. It was an extravagant display of power and wealth. Nkem, caught in the moment, enjoyed the attention. But when night fell, the king's guards escorted her home, carrying baskets of food and gallons of wine as gifts from the king. Mama Makoko was already waiting for her at the hut. She took one look at the royal offerings and sighed. My daughter, I hope you know what this means. Nkem raised an eyebrow. The king is interested in me? Mama Makoko nodded. Nkem burst into laughter. Mama, the king already has 5 wives. What would he want with me? But Mama Makoko did not laugh. Instead, she leaned forward, her face grave. Listen to me, Nkem. This is only the beginning. It's not just about the king. Your destiny is near. Nkem tilted her head, confused. Mama, what do you mean? Just keep your head down and watch. In Umuofia, the birth of a girl was met with sighs instead of celebration, and her fate was sealed before she could even speak her first words. Education was a privilege reserved for boys. Daughters were meant for the kitchen, for marriage, and for bearing sons. The village still clung to practices that wounded their women, body and spirit temen. She walked through the dusty paths of Umuofia with a grace that turned heads. Her KONKO shoes clicked against the ground with purpose, and the fabric of her city-made wrapper swayed with the confidence of a woman who knew her worth. The older women sneered, whispering that she was too proud, too full of herself. But the younger ones, oh, how they admired her. To them, Nkem was a mystery, a glimpse of what they could be, if only they had the chance. One day, as Nkem strolled past the market square, a group of young women ran up to her, their voices hushed but urgent. Auntie from the city, teach us your ways, they pleaded. How do you walk with such boldness? How do you carry yourself like the world belongs to you? They were so desperate that they were willing to trade their meager savings just to learn. Nkem's heart ached. City girls did not have to beg to be bold. It was their right. The next morning, she gathered them in Mama Makoko's hut. The old woman, respected and beloved, sat in the corner, watching with tired but hopeful eyes. Nkem spoke, her voice firm yet warm. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to be free, she told them. Education is not a gift. It is your right. A murmur ran through the crowd, then cheers erupted. One by one, the girls stepped forward, their voices trembling as they shared their pain. Tales of forced marriages, of being silenced, of suffering wounds that never truly healed from the horrible practices of female circumcision. Their words were heavy, like stones pressing against Nkem's chest. She had always enjoyed the admiration of others, but now she understood the place it came from. These girls were not just admiring her, they were reaching for salvation. Mama Makoko sighed deeply, as if she had been waiting for this moment all her life. She had always wanted to fight for the girls of Umuofia, but age had weakened her bones. As days turned into weeks, more girls joined Nkem's lessons, and the whispers of change spread like harmattan winds. But not everyone was pleased. It was not long before word reached King Ikenga. The village elders muttered that Nkem was corrupting the women, teaching them arrogance instead of obedience. Wives no longer rushed home to cook. Instead, they sat with books in their hands. The girls of Umuofia were changing, and the men feared it. King Ikenga summoned Nkem to his palace. You stand accused of leading our women astray. I have done nothing but show them their worth. Why should knowledge be a man's right and not a woman's? Do we not all belong to the same land? But Nkem saw something in his eyes, thoughtfulness, curiosity, and something else, interest. But instead of punishing her, King Ikenga did the unthinkable. He granted her request. The law forbidding girls from going to school was lifted. Overjoyed, Nkem wasted no time. She sought donations from the prominent men of the village, and one of them, Kofi, who had always watched her from afar, stepped forward. I will give you everything you need, he said. And so the girls of Umuofia began to learn. Schools were built and workshops were held under the great baobab tree. Every evening, Nkem spoke to them, and they called themselves the KONKO Shoe Girls, after the sound of confidence in their steps. Kofi often sat at the back, watching her with quiet admiration. Sometimes, after the lessons, they would walk together, their hands brushing beneath the moonlight. But change was not without its price. The elders whispered. The men grumbled. and somewhere in the shadows of Umuofia, forces stirred against Nkem and the movement she had started. The men of Umuofia were restless. A storm had swept through their village, not one of rain and thunder, but of defiance. Young wives, who had once settled into their roles as obedient partners to much older men, had begun demanding divorces. Their voices, once subdued, now rang with determination. "We want to learn. We want to be free," they declared, shaking the very foundation of tradition. The uproar reached the king's palace. A crowd of angry men gathered at the gates, their chants echoing through the village. "We no go gree! We no go gree!" Among them was Mazi Okeke, one of the king's senior advisors. His face was dark with anger as he stepped forward. "My wife has left me because of that woman, Nkem," he spat. "She has poisoned the hearts of our young women since she stepped into this village with her red KONKO shoes clicking against our sacred ground." The king, troubled by the unrest, summoned Nkem to the palace for an urgent discussion. When she arrived, all eyes burned into her, except for one, Mazi Okoro, the father of Kofi. He alone did not share in the hostility. The king questioned Nkem, but her answers were precise, confident. Try as he might, he could not find fault in her actions. She had merely encouraged the women to seek knowledge to better their lives. Yet he hesitated. She was a stranger, a woman who had only been in Umuofia for a few months. "We must restore order," the king declared at last. But he did not say how. The elders exchanged glances. They sensed weakness in the king's words, and they waited. Meanwhile, the older women of the village whispered among themselves. They admired Nkem. She was giving their daughters the freedom they had never known. Determined to turn the king against her, the elders began spying on Nkem. Soon they discovered that she was involved with Kofi, Mazi Okoro's son. A scandal, they thought. The perfect excuse to rid the village of her influence. But Mazi Okoro was no fool. Before the rumors could spiral, he urged his son to act. Kofi approached the king with gifts. "Your Highness," Kofi said, "the rumors are false. I seek no trouble. I only ask for your blessing to be with Nkem." Mazi Okoro, ever the wise man, spoke in support of his son. The elders waited for the king's outrage. But to their shock, the king smiled. "After all, I have 5 wives. You are a young man with a bright future. Your union with Nkem will bring prosperity to our land." The council of elders seethed. Their plan had failed, but their fight was far from over. Nkem's name was now on every tongue. Women from neighboring villages trekked for miles just to attend the KONKO Shu women's gatherings. But this newfound movement was met with growing resistance. One evening, as Nkem walked through a lonely path, she sensed a presence. Then suddenly, hands grabbed her. Before she could scream, rough cloth covered her mouth. She kicked, fought, but the men overpowered her. That night, Mama Makoko waited for Nkem, but she never returned. At dawn, panic set in. She sent for Kofi, her voice trembling as she told him what had happened. Kofi did not hesitate. He stormed into the palace, demanding an audience with the king. "Your Highness, they have taken her," he declared. The king's face darkened. He called for an emergency meeting. "Nkem has been kidnapped," he announced, his voice sharp with disappointment. "I am deeply angered that my words are no longer regarded as law. I give 3 days, for her to be returned safely, or I will personally hand this case over to the police." Silence fell over the council. The elders exchanged unreadable glances, but they knew the king's warning was meant for them. Mazi Okeke, the leader of the king's cabinet, wasted no time. He summoned a secret meeting of the most powerful men in the village. "The king has turned against us," he declared. "He would rather listen to a city woman than honor the customs of our ancestors. We will not sit back and watch. Since the king refuses to listen to his elders, we shall turn to the gods. We will call upon Dibia Okwunkwo, and if the king does not see reason, we will remove him." Captive in the wild deep in the forest, Nkem lay on the cold floor of an abandoned hut. In the heart of the village, unrest grew like a storm. The young women gathered before the king's palace, their voices rising in protest. "Bring back the KONKO Shu auntie," they cried. The king, with a reassuring tone, calmed their anxious hearts. Kofi, determined to find Nkem, left no stone unturned. Day and night, he led search parties, scouring the village and surrounding forests. Yet, there was no sign of her. Days passed. Nkem, held captive in a secluded hut, was growing weak. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and her throat burned with thirst. She had tried calling Kofi, but her cell phone never connected. On the fourth evening, as darkness settled, she overheard hushed whispers outside. A group of men spoke in low, urgent tones. "We must kill the king before he discovers our plans." Another voice, colder and crueler, added, "And Nikem must die tonight. She is of no use alive." Fear gripped her, but she refused to give in to despair. Desperation fueled her instincts. She broke the heel of her KONKO shoe and used its sharp edge to cut through the rope binding her wrists. Slowly, carefully, she slipped out of the hut into the night. Holding up her phone, she prayed for a signal. Nothing. She moved further into the forest, stepping lightly to avoid making noise. Then, through the dim glow of the moon, she saw them, the king's elders and the powerful Dibia Okonkwo, deep in treacherous conversation. With trembling hands, she pressed record on her phone. Their voices filled the device, sealing their fate. Without hesitation, she turned and ran, her heart pounding. She didn't stop until she reached Kofi's house. Breathless, she whispered, "No one must know I'm here until morning." At dawn, Kofi wasted no time. He went straight to the local authorities. Meanwhile, the king summoned his council of elders to the palace. They arrived, their faces unreadable, but the moment they saw Ninkem standing before them, their confidence wavered. "Tell me the truth," the king commanded. The elders denied everything, but Ninkem stepped forward and played the recording. Their own words betrayed them. Shock spread through the room as the police moved in, swiftly arresting the conspirators for kidnapping and attempted murder. The village erupted with relief. Justice had been served, and peace was restored. The KONKO Shoe Club, once a simple gathering, became a symbol of strength and empowerment for women in and beyond the village. Ninkem, victorious, returned to the city with Kofi, but she never forgot her roots. She visited often, checking on the young women who had stood up for her, ensuring their voices would never be silenced again. And so, life proved its rhythm. Sometimes it takes you down, only to lift you back up again.